Hey everyone, ARIES here. I have a very cool collaboration coming your way. This one involves a lot of lesser known narrators and they really deserve more recognition. I have all of their details listed below, so if you like them, go check out their channel and drop them a sub. This goes back 2 years ago when I just got married. I moved into my husband's one-bedroom apartment. The layout of the room is pretty important to the story. When you walk through the bedroom doors, you see the queen-sized bed up against the opposite wall. The window covers pretty much the whole left wall. On the other side of the bed is a big dresser, and beside the dresser is a walk-in closet. The walk-in closet is messy 90% of the time. And by messy, I mean the entire floor would be covered in clothes that would reach my waist level. It would also be pretty difficult to walk through. It was the place that we put anything that didn't belong in the living room when guests were over. Anyway, you get the point. It's a big mess in there. I slept on the side of the bed that was closest to the dresser. The dresser was big enough that it would partially block my view of the walk-in closet. One night, I woke up all of a sudden. I was facing the walk-in closet. I saw my husband in the middle of it, his back facing me, just looking around the closet. He was wearing the same clothes that he wore to bed. I thought it was really strange for him to walk into the closet, since none of his belongings were in there, and plus it was the middle of the night. I propped myself up and asked him what he was doing in the closet, and to come back to bed. His face turned slightly, but just enough for me to see half his cheek. I was really sleepy, so I turned back to bed and fell asleep. I'm not sure how much time had passed, but I woke up again to my husband getting into bed. I asked him why he was in the closet, and he told me he didn't know what I was talking about. He just went to the washroom. We both fell back asleep, and I tried to continue the conversation in the morning. He swore he just went to the bathroom, and that it was no more than 1 minute. He thought I was definitely dreaming, but I know what I saw. That person in the closet was my husband, or at least 100% looked like him. I can't think of any logical explanation. Even if my husband had some reason to lie, I still can't see how he could get in the middle of the closet without knocking anything over in the mess. We've moved since, and nothing like that had happened until tonight. Quick layout of our new place. It's a small 700 square foot condo. On the left of the front door are our laundry units. It's not in a room or anything. It's more like a space in the wall you can just fit the washer and dryer. No doors or anything. On the right is a small den. Beside the laundry units is the bathroom, and as you walk into the unit, there's an open kitchen which leads to the living room. The bedroom is between the kitchen/living room and bathroom. Our washers and dryers are stacked, and I was moving the laundry from the washer to the dryer. While I was moving the clothes, I saw my husband walk into the den. It was clear as day. I thought he was going to play some video games or use his computer. After I loaded all the clothes into the dryer, I walked back to the living room. I saw my husband sitting in the middle of the living room. I immediately asked him when he went back to the living room. He was really confused and said he hadn't left his seat in the last 30 minutes. I told him I saw him walk into the den just a minute ago. How did he walk out of the den without me seeing or hearing him? I know I saw him both times. Both times he appeared clearly in front of me. I spoke to his family about this before, and they've said something similar happened when he was living with them. His mom and brother once saw him return home in the middle of the day. They called out to him, since they were surprised he returned home so early, but apparently my husband didn't respond. Both his mom and brother saw him go into his room. Hours later, my husband returned home again. His family asked him when he went out again, as they didn't hear him leave. My husband said it was the first time returning home since leaving in the morning. I have no idea what's going on, or if all 3 of these incidents are connected. They happened in different countries and years apart. the first incident being about 20 years ago.
I've wanted to get this story off my chest for a while. I've told a few people here and there, but it really doesn't give me any closure as to what happened, and holy hell, was this damn creepy. Where the hell do I begin? Well, first off, my name is Dakota. I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah, and I've lived here all my life. I live in the city, but I love the outdoors during the summer. I'm always out hiking with friends or fishing and camping. It's the thing to do. One of my best friends, we'll call him George, would always talk to me about his father's property out in Duchenne. They had a few acres with trailers and RVs scattered around this little sandy cliffside that they lived next to that would actually drop you down into a canyon if you were brave enough to trek. He would always tell me about the freedom they had out there. You could go shooting wherever you wanted, even stand outside your own home butt naked and no one would give a damn, because no one is around to see you. Anyway, back to the story. So George had invited me to go out to his father's property with him and was really excited to go since I had never actually been out toward Duchenne. The drive there from Salt Lake City is about an hour and a half to about 2 hours away, so it's a decent drive. When we arrived, I was pleasantly surprised to see his property was exactly as he explained it to me, and I absolutely loved it and couldn't wait to get out and explore. I should remind you that his property was in the middle of nowhere, right off of an old closed highway and up a hill, seriously in complete dry barren wilderness. There are cougars, bears, coyotes, rattlesnakes, and plenty of other animals that wouldn't mind making you their lunch. But even so, we had plenty of firearms there to make sure nothing would happen. And that's another thing I need you to remember. We were armed to the teeth with firearms. George had just recently bought an 18-inch sawed-off 12-gauge double-barreled shotgun, as well as an AK-47. His dad also owned a plethora of other weapons, which included a 30-30-300 Ultra Mag, 12-gauge pump-action 24-inch long-barrel double-barrel, and plenty of other handguns and revolvers, so there was no fear of anything happening on our trip. I think we were there for about 3 or 4 days, just having a ton of fun target shooting and hunting rabbits and snakes. But the last night we were there, some really weird stuff happened to us. I still cannot explain to anyone exactly what happened and what I saw. I'm sorry I've been dragging this out. I just really needed to explain how candid we were about this. We really just thought we were going on a little vacation to get away from everything. Then we would be home and that was that. Holy hell, was I wrong though. So that last night we were there, George, his father, and I had been drinking and playing poker and just having a fun time when me and George decided to head up to the trailer where we could just hang out together and reminisce about the old days. We get to the trailer and mind you, he has his AK-47 and I'm holding on to his sawed-off shotgun. George decides to call his girlfriend back in Salt Lake City to see how she was doing, and I didn't think anything of it at all, until for some reason, while we were on the phone, she had brought up the subject of a Wendigo. Us being out in the middle of nowhere and kind of getting creeped out, we told her to cut it out and quit trying to scare us because we had this dumb belief that if you mentioned a Wendigo, that you would just be stalked by it, even though we knew that they're just myths. As George is speaking with his girlfriend on the phone, I'm lying on this half sofa type deal right next to the wide open window on the right side of the trailer, and I swear to God I was seeing what looked like a person in the distance in the shrubbery and small trees walking back and forth, almost trying to conceal themselves, but not doing a very good job. At this point I tell George what I'm seeing, and he starts to worry his girlfriend because she's hearing us talk out loud about how we think we're being watched. Again, this is right after the mentioning of a Wendigo. George gets off the phone with his girlfriend and just now reminds me that the trailer we were in did not have a lock on it. I'm like, what the hell, dude? Let's get the hell out of here, or at least get to a trailer we can lock. As I'm saying this, I noticed that the figure had gotten closer to the trailer, and I got a better look at who or what it was. One thing that I saw that I literally have burned into my brain was the thing's neck. It was way too long to be a normal human. It stretched out and almost caused its head to bob around like a weight on the top of a loose spring. Once I saw this, it wasn't against leaving, but mentioned that we would have to go outside where the guy was if we wanted to get anywhere, and so we made a very difficult choice. We only had a small electric lantern. It would only illuminate about 5 or 6 feet in front of us, and we're standing back to back with our weapons in hand, literally ready to shoot anything that gets close to us. We just circled back to back and circled around and around as we walked to the other trailer. It was about 50 yards away, and during that time we were completely hysterical. We didn't hear any footsteps following us or anything moving in the distance as we slowly but surely got to the other trailer. This is when the story gets kind of messed up. It still makes me sick just thinking about it. We finally got to the other trailer that had a lock, and we got in and we tried to be as silent as we could. We didn't want to even risk looking out the windows or moving the curtains to give away where we were at, even though they definitely knew where we were. About an hour passes and we think we're in the clear. The next thing we know, we are looking at the shadow of this thing standing directly in front of the moonlight, in front of the curtained window, standing completely still, no movement whatsoever. At this point, we are about to piss and crap our pants, all at the same time, when as soon as it was there, it was gone. We didn't see it move, didn't hear it or anything, just looked back after a second, and it was gone. The oddest thing happened after this though. I started to hear a pig. A damn pig. Like it was in its pen oinking up a storm, and I turned to George to ask him if he was hearing the same thing I was. We just hear the weird disembodied voice come from outside the trailer. Oink. Not like a pig, but a person. But this voice was sinister, like they wanted us to know they knew we were afraid, and it was said mockingly. I don't know if this really was just some guy in a weird getup just going around and terrorizing some random people's properties, or if it really was something else. I have no damn clue, but I never want to go back out there to find out.
This post is inspired by Crazy Turtle Mama, who posted about a childhood encounter with a similar entity. I haven't thought about this for a long time, but I wanted to post my experience to see if anyone else has seen one of these things, too. I'm doxing myself if anyone I know reads this, but oh well. I lost my home and job in Hurricane Katrina in 2005. I returned to New Orleans a month later to salvage my possessions, and found a job doing disaster relief for FEMA. Since 80% of the city's housing was destroyed, it was nearly impossible to find a safe, clean, and affordable place to live. After sleeping in my car and on friends' couches for several weeks, I found a furnished studio apartment in the French Quarter at a surprisingly low price. It was filthy, infested with roaches, and had creepy art all over the walls. But it was my only housing option, so I rolled up my sleeves, enthusiastically cleaned and repainted and moved in. Everything was fine until around Thanksgiving, when someone delivered flowers to the apartment. The card read, "Dear man's name, rest in peace, love your family." I figured someone had delivered them to the wrong address, but they looked pretty, so I took them inside and put them in a vase. I later told one of my neighbors about the odd delivery, and he went pale and said, "Oh no, you weren't supposed to take those inside." He then informed me that a very depressed, alcoholic young man had lived there a year ago and hung himself one night in the apartment. The ceiling didn't have enough drop room to break his neck, so he slowly strangled. The neighbors heard him choking and kicking the wall in agony, and eventually broke down the door and called 911, but it was too late. His windpipe was crushed, and he died in the apartment. After that, the new tenants all complained of paranormal activity, and no one stayed more than a month or two. They all broke lease and left abruptly, usually leaving all their possessions behind, which is why I got it cheap and furnished. His parents believed his spirit was still there, and regularly delivered flowers or gifts to the home, but the neighbors had agreed never to take them inside since it seemed to make the activity worse. Would have been nice to get that memo, but okay. After that, I also began to experience paranormal activity. I woke up hearing a loud, rhythmic thumping noise in the walls at the same time every night, right where he'd hung himself. All the flowers and plants withered and died within a few hours of bringing them inside the apartment. Objects would move on their own, and anything I hung on the walls would unscrew itself and crash to the floor. Some nights, the bead curtain between the kitchenette and the main room would move on its own, like someone was walking through it. It was creepy, but I decided to endure it since I had nowhere else to live. I'm superstitious, but I'm also a pragmatist, and I felt sorry for the young man who died a horrible, lonely death, and whose spirit was now trapped within the walls. I would often speak out loud to him, read the notes his family sent to the house, and basically try to befriend him. The neighbors told me he probably enjoyed having a friendly young woman his own age around. I even created a small altar for him, with objects I thought would bring him comfort. This all turned out to be a big mistake. The bizarre activity continued to escalate over months, and I became more and more depressed. It wasn't just the apartment, it was working long hours. The city was beyond fucked up, and my disaster relief job was traumatic. Everything culminated in a visit from an old friend, a self-described skeptic and atheist, in the spring of 2006. After one night in my apartment, he moved into a hotel and said, "You shouldn't stay in that place anymore. There's something bad there." A few days later, I was assigned to a nursing home to help the residents process their disaster relief applications. An elderly lady I was working with suddenly stopped and said, "God is giving me a word for you, young lady. You're in danger right now. If you stay where you are any longer, you'll die." By that point, I was thoroughly freaked out. I called my landlord and told her I appreciated the cheap place, but I had to move out. She said, "I'm not surprised." I arranged to move in with a friend until I could find a new place. Once I began packing up, the paranormal activity escalated violently. The thumping got louder to the point where I couldn't sleep. I also began to experience sleep paralysis. One night I woke up around the time the thumping usually started, but the room was dead quiet. The bead curtain started moving again, but this time something came through. It was vaguely human-shaped, but it wasn't human. Its body was gray and faded out, like television static or smoke. It had no hands, feet, or face. It moved in an unsettling way, shuffling and stooped and jerky, like something very old struggling to walk. I laid there, frozen in fear, as it moved slowly across the room, eventually standing by the bed behind my head, and leaned over until it loomed inches from my face. It let out a strange, high-pitched screech, and then whispered something softly. I can't remember what it said. Something mildly comforting, like, "Don't worry, baby." But as it breathed into my ear, a wave of cold, dark, clammy dread washed over my body. It was the worst sensation I've ever felt in my life. All I could describe it as is a feeling of suicide, of dying alone in darkness and terror with no comfort. Then it faded into the wall and disappeared. I jumped out of bed, turned all the lights on, and spent the rest of the night frantically packing and throwing things into my car. I was out by morning and slept at my friend's house that night. Early the next morning, I woke up on her couch with sleep paralysis. There was a doorway in her wall that shouldn't be there. It turned out there had once been a physical doorway there, but it had been plastered over into the wall. The old gray thing came through again. It leaned over me again until it was lying completely on top of me, whispering gentle nonsense into my ear, infecting my entire body with foul, creeping dread. Then it left. My friend woke up shortly afterward and said she had horrible nightmares all night. I threw away every object I owned associated with the apartment and called my mother, a deeply religious woman. "I think a ghost followed me from my old place," I said, and told her everything that had happened. She was alarmed. "That's not a human spirit," she said. "That's something else pretending to be one." She sent me to her priest for a blessing. I saw it a few times after that, but it eventually faded away. It seemed to lose power over me the longer I stayed outside the haunted apartment. Years passed, and eventually I never saw it again. I still own one object from the apartment, though. An artwork that was hanging there when I moved in, that I haven't been able to part with. It reminds me of that scary time, of everything I went through and survived. It's an abstract print of a light-colored piece of textile, twisting across a black background. It's vaguely human-shaped, but it isn't human.
I firmly believe that there are many unexplained things in this world. You know, the things we have a hard time discussing with others because you don't want to be labeled as crazy, but you know they are there all the same. I believe my dad's house contains such an entity. There really isn't one big story to tell, but rather a bunch of small ones that combine into something really hard to write off as sheer coincidence. Most of these are told from my dad's perspective, although I was able to experience one for myself. I was spending the night at my dad's house one time, and we were all in the living room watching TV. My little sister was sitting on the couch with my dad and stepmom, and I was sitting in the recliner with one of the dogs. The other dog was laying in front of the couch. In between the couch and the recliner was an end table, and sitting on the end table was a glass box that my stepmom got from her mom. We were paying it no mind when we heard a crash. We weren't expecting it, so we all jumped. The glass box had fallen off the backside of the table and broke. It had been sitting a good distance away from the edge, so it couldn't have fallen on its own. No one was close enough to bump the table. It was like someone lightly pushed it off the edge, just like what a cat would do. We investigated for several minutes before chalking it up to another one of those incidents. My dad was standing in the middle of the living room watching TV. It was in the middle of the day, and he was the only one home. Suddenly, from the direction of his bedroom, he heard a deep and loud "ha ha." His first thought was that someone had broken into the house, so he ran in there ready to beat the daylights out of the intruder, only to find an empty room. He looked around for a while, but didn't find anyone there. Another time, my dad was in the living room again. It was just him and the dogs. He got up to grab the remote and made a comment, you know, the kind you make when you think out loud, and then he heard someone hiss, "Silence," in his ear. My dad, the king of underreactions, simply grabbed the remote and on his way back to his chair, said, "How about you shut the fuck up?" He didn't hear anything else the rest of the day. One night, when my dad and stepmom had just gotten in bed, they just pulled the sheets over them, the door that leads to their bedroom started to shake. I'm not talking about some mild shaking that may come with an old house. It was like someone took a hold of the door itself and was violently trying to shake it off its hinges. Needless to say, my stepmom was glad that my dad wasn't working nights that night. Along with these events, there have been some shadow people sightings witnessed by both my dad and my little sister. One of those sightings happened in the middle of the day. My dad was in the kitchen watching one of his football games. Something compelled him to look toward the entrance of the kitchen, and he saw shadowy, disembodied feet walk across the entrance. My dad, once again, the king of underreactions, looked out the kitchen. When he saw nothing, he shrugged his shoulders and went back to his football. This last sighting is something that both my dad and little sister swear up and down they saw. On the right back corner of the living room, there is a very short hallway with 3 doors. A door to the bathroom, a door to my room, and a door to what used to be my little sister's room, but it's now used for storage. The 2 bedroom doors are on the right side with the bathroom door right in front of them. You can see the bedroom doors from the living room. They saw a shadow figure leave the bathroom and head into the storage room. That being said, the storage room seems to be where this thing dwells when it isn't bothering my family. It's to the point that my sister refuses to ever go in that room again, and even just walking past that room is enough to cause the hairs on the back of your neck to stand on end. I could go on for hours, but I'm going to stop here. If any of you have any idea what we're dealing with, please let me know.
A few weeks ago, on a Saturday night, I let my dog Riley into the backyard. He was out there for about 10 minutes, and so I opened the back door to call him inside. He didn't come inside, which was weird because he usually did, so I closed the back door and waited. After about 5 or so minutes, I opened the back door to let him in. "Riley," I called. No response. "Riley, come inside. Night-night." Again. No response. This is where things get weird. I whistled for him, and then, from the other side of the yard, I heard someone whistle back. The same exact whistle I had whistled. What the fuck? I muttered under my breath. I thought it was just my imagination, so I whistled again. And again, the person whistled back. I shut the door and locked it. I went to my grandparents' bedroom and looked out the window. I saw nothing. I went back to the kitchen where the back door was and flipped the porch light on. I went back to the bedroom and looked out the window. Again, there was nothing to be seen. After that, I decided to go to the living room and tell my grandparents what happened. My grandpa told me to grab a flashlight and Riley's leash and check it out. He said the whistling was probably just the neighbors across the alley. I grabbed a flashlight and Riley's leash and turned the porch light off because I was afraid of what I might see with it on. So afraid that I didn't even plan to use the flashlight. I'm a small and skinny 16-year-old male, and I'm not that good at fighting. As soon as I stepped out into the cold, dark night, I wished I would have gone to my room and grabbed my baseball bat. Slowly, I made my descent off the porch steps. I know I'm sounding like a little wuss in this story, but the shit is scary. One time last year, in the middle of the night, I heard someone slam the cellar door shut. That scared me so bad, but I was even more scared now. I stopped on the second to last step and looked around the yard. I finally got enough courage to call out, "Riley?" I called. Then, from right behind me, I heard a soft voice whisper, "Riley?" I turned to see a face peering at me from under the porch. I couldn't even scream. The face peering at me was a crazed face. Looked like a crackhead, which is common where I live. I ran up a few stairs, kicked the dude in the face through the spaces between them so he couldn't grab at me, and ran inside. I told my grandpa what happened, and he got his gun and came back outside with me. We searched the whole yard. No sign of the crazy guy or my dog Riley. The back gate was wide open, and there was blood on the stair that man's face was on. The blood was from me kicking him. The cops were called, of course. I explained everything to them. After the cops spoke to me, they left. Haven't heard anything from them since. The next morning we found Riley standing in a random driveway, which was good. My guess as to what happened is that the crazy man was already in my yard when I let Riley out, and he was on some other side of the yard where Riley didn't notice him. Riley must have discovered that the gate was opened and left to wander around. It was a pretty terrifying experience, and I'm glad that my dog wasn't hurt.
Okay, first, some context as to how I got where this encounter took place. I was on a road trip with my best friend, traveling through some of the northwestern states of the US. My friend liked having a plan, and while we did have a plan to some extent, she also learned how fun it was to do things my way, which is more spontaneous. Like seeing a sign that sounds interesting and following it to see what we could find. We were at the end of our trip, and we were trying to get home by the following afternoon so she could have her birthday dinner with her family. I was doing most of the driving on this trip anyways, so that evening I decided to get a nap in, and then drive through the night while she slept. I did. I had no problems, and I stopped off for another nap midway and got a coffee at a dope coffee stand in the middle of nowhere in Oregon that was somehow open at 3 a.m. Anyway, that's irrelevant. It's about 5 a.m. or 5:30, and I see a sign from the highway that says, "Historic Covered Bridge, next exit." So I'm like, sweet, I could use a break and some fresh air. I got off at the next exit and followed this little road and find the bridge that's only wide enough for one car at a time. I drive through it, realize I'll have to turn around at some point, so I just flipped a U-turn down the road and drove back through it and pulled off into the gravel lot a little ways up the road. My friend was still asleep, so I just turned the car off, rolled my window down, and left my keys in the engine. I walked down to the bridge and noticed there was one of those information signs, so I started reading it. It said something about the early settlers or something. I can't remember much, but I remember it also said something about how the name was Grave Creek because a girl from the party had died there, or had been buried there, something like that. I think she got sick and died, so they named the creek after her. It was super quiet. The early part of the morning where the sun is starting to come up, but everything feels like it's still whispering. Like when you're camping and wake up really early. Well, anyway, it was peaceful and quiet, and I was enjoying my break of fresh air with a bit of history. I had a rock in my shoe, so I leaned against a little white fence that separated me from the bridge, and took my shoe off. Mid-tending to my foot, I happened to look up, and this woman was literally crawling from under the bridge. I kid you not, I felt like my whole body was instantly full of adrenaline, and everything in me was screaming to get the crap out of there. More context. I am a tall and very strong woman, always have been. People don't usually try to do anything to me because I can obviously hold my own. As a result, I hardly ever get intimidated by strangers, and I definitely don't get intimidated by other women. But guys, I kid you not, I was terrified, and I can't even give you a good reason why. This woman, who just crawled up a muddy hillside from the creek under the bridge, was first, bald. What the crap? Second, immaculately clean for having crawled out from under a bridge. Third, wearing a strapless sundress. Again, what the crap? Had the biggest eyes I'd ever seen. Maybe it was exaggerated by the lack of hair. Fifth, and worst of all, she would not stop smiling. She had the biggest grin like the Cheshire Cat, and the entire time she never stopped grinning. So, anyway, back to the story. At this point, she's standing about 2 meters away from me. I'm in a full panic and want to scream and run on the inside, but I tried to play it cool because I was wondering if she was a hiker, maybe she was homeless, maybe she was a druggie. There's too much about her at first glance that doesn't add up, and I think I was extra anxious because she pretty much snuck up on me. I know my friend is still asleep, and the car is a good ways down the road. So, I decided to play it cool, and keep my panic to myself. Mind you, I still had my other shoe off too. So my brilliant idea was to play it cool, which would give me time to put my shoe back on and take off the other one so she doesn't think anything is up. Make sure she doesn't know I feel threatened by her. So here I am now dusting non-existent rocks from my other shoe while she is telling me something about her life story. All I remember her saying is that her mom and her used to come out here all the time, and now her mom is dead. She asked me if I had any money. I lied and said I had just used the last of my cash at the gas station a while back. I told her I was on the road with my friend and we were due home today. Finally, I get my other shoe back on and say I should be getting back to my friend. I calmly and casually make my break for it and think I'm in the clear because she says, "Oh yeah, bye," or whatever, and she starts to head to the other side of the road. I'm now at a safe distance, so I turn my back and walk a little faster to the car when I hear her voice behind me asking if I have a cigarette. I turned around to answer her and realized in the 10 or 15 seconds I had my back to her, she had started walking towards me and was much closer. Again. Oh, I really panicked then. On the inside, of course, because I was still playing it cool outwardly. I tell her no, neither of us smoke, and she said, "Oh, that's good. It's bad for your health anyways." And I'm just in my head like, nope, get me out of here. She turns back to the other side of the road, and I get to the car, and I've never in my life turned on a car, locked the doors, rolled windows up, and whipped it into gear as fast as I did then. My friend that had still been sleeping woke up when I got in. I didn't tell her what was going on, I just started driving. And this chick was standing at the side of the road, grinning, staring right at me. It was the most scared I've ever been in my entire life. And as far as I know, she didn't even have a weapon. But everything about her was unnerving and wrong somehow. My friend dozed back off while I spent the next 2 hours driving. My body was literally trembling. My friend woke up around 7 and offered to take over. So we swapped. I told her what happened and she was shocked. Apparently she had woken up a bit when she was alone in the car and looked back, saw me, but didn't realize I was with someone. I would have to ask her, because it's been a few years now. I can't remember if she saw the lady as I drove away or she didn't see her at all. To be fair, her chair was reclined and she was sleeping pretty heavily. But she was really surprised when she realized how shook up I was, even hours after the fact. In all, it took me about 4 or 5 hours to calm down after that. And I spent the next year lightweight paranoid that that woman would somehow show up again somewhere else. Actually, I'm still kind of scared of that. My mom lives in Washington, so sometimes I do travel through that area. I just think, no, please, no, never again. Needless to say, who needs Oregon and its covered bridges with creepy bald chicks and sundresses beneath them?
I'll preface this by saying that I'm a big believer in the paranormal. I used to find it laughable, but wound up living in a violently haunted house for more than a decade that opened my mind up a fair bit. That being said, I still generally assume that most creepy encounters, including my own, are misidentification, unless something suggests otherwise. But anyway, about 2 years ago, I got settled with taking care of a puppy. He was only about 6 weeks old at the time, so he required a crap load of attention and care, the most annoying of which was that he had to be taken outside to pee every 2 hours, or so even, often especially in the middle of the night, or else you had a mess on your hands. Now, stumbling outside half awake at 3 a.m. in the freezing cold is disorienting at the best of times, but the trailer I've been renting in Rollen, North Carolina, for the record, has a bit of a disturbing history that makes every little sound or shadow feel a little more sinister than it is. It was one of these nights that my little buddy woke me up squalling to pee, and I stumbled down the steps to let him do his business. He immediately started crying to go back inside. His bladder's still full, and I had to chase him up the steps a couple of times, getting increasingly irritated the whole time. After about the 4th time, I placed him in the grass. He couldn't hold it anymore, and I had looked around to give him some privacy. That's when I saw something. It was peering over my neighbor's hedge at us, standing upright and seemingly about to crawl over until it was spotted. I didn't have my glasses on, so I can't really speak to specific details, but whatever it was ridiculously white, real thin, obviously naked. It had unnervingly long arms. The hedge was around 6 feet, and it could just see over, so I'd estimate it was around the same height. When I looked at it, it stood stock still in the darkness. But when I turned my flashlight on it, dropped back on the neighbor's side and scurried on all 4s around the side of her house and out of sight. My blood ran cold, and I slept in the living room that night. Because my bedroom was on the same side of the house that I saw that thing, and had a large unobstructed window that I just didn't feel like sitting in front of for a few days. I mentioned it to some other people in the house, and they laughed it off as me imagining things, seeing the neighbor's cat, or even her meth-head daughter streaking. But it just didn't come up again for a good long while. I figured maybe it was just my imagination running wild. A few months ago, I got married, and now we have 3 dogs that have to be taken out before we can go to sleep. They're 3 goofy, high-energy, extremely protected pit bulls that always seem super excited. Off and on, I had to spend the night at my sister's house to put my nieces on the bus so she can go to work early. So my wife had to let the dogs out before going to sleep by herself. Several times, she's mentioned the dogs whining and wanting to go in without using the bathroom, hearing something fairly large crawling around in the woods, seeing weird eyes shine in the brush that runs off when her light hits it, and hearing a strange sound she could only describe as chittering. I was trying to find a sound that matched what she was talking about to try and set her mind at ease when some variation on the phrase chittering in woods led to a story on flesh gates. I rolled my eyes at the typical creepypasta BS, but the obviously fake picture included made my skin crawl and my heart pound because it was exactly the way I remember it that night. Literally, hadn't thought of it in 2 years, but hearing so many people describe the exact same thing recently makes me think that maybe I shouldn't have dismissed it so easily. No idea what actually happened. Literally nobody does. But about 6 months before I started renting the place, One of the tenants disappeared from his bed in the middle of the night and was found torn to shreds about 200 yards away in the thickest part of the woods, lying in a small creek about 2 months later. He'd been ranting about demonic possession and that they were coming for him for months prior. And although he was obviously partially eaten, they couldn't figure out what did it. This sounds a little over the top, but it's assumed he was an undiagnosed schizophrenic that wandered off drunk. Coyotes are everywhere around here, as are black bear, and although there aren't supposed to be cougar in the area, we aren't too far from the mountains, and a fair handful of neighbors say they think they've heard one prowling.
To whomever it may concern, I feel I must warn you about the strange things going on in Oregon. The past 4 years or so, things seem to have been changing. I don't know how or why, but others are feeling it too. Since these feelings, I personally have seen many strange things. Things that I can now say almost confidently are not of this world. I have posted previously about some of the strange things that have happened to me. However, I am now connecting all of these sightings. Never have I seen such strange animals before. The first encounter I ever had with one of these creatures was at Cape Blanco, on the coast by Port Orford. It resembled the children's toy Furby. It had a bulbous, fuzzy body and large triangular floppy ears. The thing that struck out the most about this creature was its feet. The feet were so huge in comparison to its small, frumpy body. It was very cute. At the time, my cousin and I couldn't focus on anything being cute. We were too busy staring in wonder at this beautiful new animal. It moved forward by hopping and eventually disappeared into the brush. Right before it left, we got the sight of its face, something I have now come to terms with. We couldn't see it. For some reason, it blurred, and it was as if our brains wouldn't allow us to look at it. However, every other part of the body was clearly visible. The second encounter was in November. I was driving down the coast from Coos Bay. It was very late. I could make out something lurking on the road in front of me. I thought it could be a deer, so I slowed down. What I saw was far from a deer. Crossing the street, headed for a house, was some type of shape. A shape I can't describe, but the shape had glowing red eyes. I don't know exactly how to say it, but those eyes seemed so far apart. Like I was looking at a moving picture, not from here exactly, but of a different time and place. There's not much I can say about this one, except it was dark. It did not have a good vibe, or anything positive. The final time was just a few nights ago. I was about to head out of my house around 10 p.m. to go visit my friend. I gathered my things and opened the front door, and immediately something felt off. Something was telling me to stop and head back into my room and just watch a show or read. I shouldn't be out here. It then occurred to me that the motion activated light was already on when I stepped out, meaning something would have had to have been moving before I went out. I asked about it and got some, well, what I found to be reasonable explanations. I agreed and headed back out. When I looked up, something was waiting for me under the light of our shed. It resembled a large cat, but it was very skinny. Its torso was long and unnatural. It looked like it was trying to mock what a cat would look like, as if telling someone who had never seen a cat to draw a cat based off of the description. This one made my gut sink. It was insidious. A wicked, horrible thing, whatever it was. I stared back at it, nodded, said a nope of farewell, and shut the door. About 15 minutes later, there was a boom in the sky, fairly close, and the lights in the house flickered. Every night our dog gets up at the early hours of the morning and just barks and howls at nothing. I've been getting an eerie feeling every time I walk by the window at night. There has been a rise in what I suppose is called shadow people around, and all my friends have been having more paranormal things happening. If anyone else is experiencing anything in Oregon, please let me know. I want to know what's going on.
So before I start this story, I have to explain the job I worked at. It was a security job, where I worked overnights, usually from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Now, it was a rather large property I had to watch, which consisted in me driving around a company vehicle throughout the night, making sure there wasn't any trespassers or things that were out of the ordinary. Now, usually there never was, and mostly every day consisted of me just listening to podcasts and driving around. One night about 3 a.m. to 4 a.m., I'm driving around and come to the abandoned parking lot. This parking lot is part of the property I have to watch. Now, this parking lot is on a road that's kind of out of the way in a small town. It's where an old business used to be, but it got torn down. Anyways, this parking lot is surrounded by trees. The entrances are also kind of blocked off by some branches, so you have to drive through them. As you can imagine, there's no streetlights on the parking lot or the adjacent street. So as usual, I take out my flashlight as I come through the branched entrance. I lower my window and shine my flashlight through the parking lot, and nothing. But as I start to turn, in the corner of my right eye, I see a shadow figure waving its hands. I stop the truck. The figure comes closer, waving its hands. I move my flashlight and shine it on the figure. It's a man, probably late 20s, regular build, scruffy beard. I crack my passenger window open and say, "What are you doing?" The man tells me he needs help and begins to walk to my side. He keeps saying he needs help and begins coming closer. I yell at him to stop. He's about 5 feet from my truck, and I don't want him closer for my own safety. I ask what he needs help with, as I can best remember what he exactly tells me. In a low, soft voice is,
"Hey man, I was wondering if you could help me out. I lost something over here, and was wondering if you could help me find it."
So I then ask him what. He says his phone, but the thing is, not to be rude, he kind of looks like an addict, and someone who may not have a phone. I tell him maybe I could help him. But here's where things get strange. He then tells me,
"Is it okay if I use your phone?"
Obviously, I said no. I'm not giving my phone to a stranger I just met at 3 a.m. So I tell him I'll just call his phone myself. So I ask him for his number. He kind of pauses and then says,
No. It's okay. All you have to do is get out of your car, and I'll use your phone. Just follow me. It's around this bush."
I look at him confused, and he keeps telling me just follow me behind this bush. Now, I've watched enough shows and movies to know that this strange man raises a bunch of red flags. I'm working at night in the middle of a nowhere town, in a secluded, abandoned dark parking lot, where I won't see another person till 7 a.m. The last thing I want to do is give my cell phone and follow some sketchy dude behind a bush. I get nervous and tell him in a loud voice, no, and that if he doesn't leave, I'm calling the effing cops. The man visibly gets frustrated and says,
No, it's alright.
Backs away slowly into the darkness. I leave that parking lot faster than I ever have and don't return for another hour or so. I came back and luckily didn't find him. Now, I don't know if he was telling the truth or had some weird intentions, but let's not meet again.